Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the content director at Word on Fire. And with me is the Auxiliary Bishop of Santa Barbara, Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop Barron, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Brandon. It's always a joy to be with you.
Now, you recently returned from a cross-country trip. You went from California all the way to Atlanta, Georgia. What were you doing there? And tell us a little bit about the event.
Well, it was one of the rollout events. We call them for the pivotal players. So as that has been published, we have these events around the country. We had one out here in Orange County. We had one in New York, one in Chicago, and now Atlanta, then a final one in Houston. The idea is just to gather some people together, to show parts of the video, to talk about how it was made, encourage them to buy it, et cetera, et cetera. You know, so we had the event in Atlanta. And I like Atlanta a lot. I've been there a number of times over the years, and I just find it to be a pretty vibrant church. And it's headed by an old friend of mine. Archbishop Wilton Gregory was my spiritual director when I was a kid, when I was just a first-year student at Mundelein back in like 1982. So I've known him for a long time, and he's a very gracious host and a gracious leader of that church, a very vibrant church. And we had a room full of, hundreds of people, and they were enthusiastic, so it was a joy, even though it was a quick trip. And travel from where I am in Santa Barbara just to get to the LA airport is difficult. But it was a good trip.
Tell us about, I wasn't there, but I heard secondhand, there were so many people who cited Word on Fire and your own work as pivotal to their conversions. Tell us about that.
Yeah, whenever I hear that, it's what makes me happiest. It's the most moving thing I can hear. And what's been clear to me, Brandon, as time goes by, that I started doing the sermons in about the year 2000, right? YouTube videos 2007, so 10 years ago we started. So when a young person comes up to me, maybe they're in their mid-20s or maybe 30, well, I realized, they grew up with this. I've been doing this for so long. I think, this is one more video, one more sermon. But there are people who, they first heard about me when they were maybe 10 years old or 12, or maybe they were in confirmation class and someone showed them one of the videos, and they in high school saw the Catholicism series, and now they're 30. So I find that very very moving and very powerful. And yes, people that say I'm doing RCIA because of, reading this book or watching this video. So praise God. It's a great joy, Well,
listen, today I want to talk about a video that popped up on my Facebook feed over and over again. I know you said you saw it in yours. Several people on Twitter were asking us to comment on this. The video was just posted a few days ago, and yet it already has over 2 million views. So it's clearly getting a lot of traction. That's right. So it's a clip taken from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert being the famous Catholic comedian. And Colbert has on his show as a guest the comedian Ricky Gervais, who is an outspoken atheist. He's spoken at many atheist events. And according to the title of the YouTube video, they're going head to head on religion, or they're debating the existence of God. So I thought that we could play through this video clip by clip and then get some of your thoughts on each of their answers. Does that sound good?
Great. Let's do it.
All right. So starting off here, we're going to start about 30 seconds into the video because they had a little small talk to begin with. But here's Stephen Colbert and Ricky Gervais talking about God.
About hell before, about this tweet about you going to hell.
Yeah.
And I know that you're an atheist, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. People have been debating... that's the devil waiting for you in hell, by the way. Yeah. Would you want to debate the existence of God? Okay. Yeah. So, Ricky Gervais, why is there something instead of nothing?
That makes no sense at all.
You have to answer my question.
That's not the two choices.
No, but the choices I'm giving you, I'm the host.
Well, I don't...
You want to concede the debate? Why is there something instead of nothing?
Hold on.
Yes?
What do you mean, out of nothing? What do you...
Why is there something instead of why is there nothing? Why does the universe exist at all? Why is there something?
But surely the bigger question is not why, but how.
Well, let's stop there, Bishop. So they asked this question, why is there something rather than nothing? What do you make of Ricky's response, and how would you answer?
Well, my first reaction was it's a more popular rendering of what Bertrand Russell did many decades ago when he famously debated F.C. Copleston on the BBC. And Copleston laid out, in that case, a very succinct, cogent version of the argument from contingency, and it was shaped by Leibniz. He purposely chose not to use Thomas's version. Anyway, he lays the argument out and says, Russell, okay, what's up with that? And Russell, instead of engaging the argument, he never once engaged it, never once in however long that debate is, 30 minutes or 45 minutes, never engaged it, just kept saying it's not a valid question. It's not a question that makes any sense. I remember at one point Copleston just sort of mocked him, like, well, I just mean by, a necessary being one that explains itself, and one that's not necessary doesn't explain itself. And now you might disagree with the argument, but I can't believe you don't know what I mean when I say that. Well, anyway, I thought of that when Ricky Gervais said, no, it's a non-question. Well, why is there something rather than nothing? It's been formulated in different ways over the centuries, but most recently in the 20th century by Martin Heidegger raised that famous question, why is there something rather than nothing? So it's a question that comes up not just in a sort of common sense way. It comes up in some of the greatest philosophers in the great tradition. To say it's a non-question, to me, is just a way of running around this problem and not really engaging it. To my mind, it's a darn good question, and I think you can demonstrate why, actually. But simply to shoot the horse in the starting gate. See, that's what that meant. That's what that approach is. And they're off, and you just shoot the horse in the starting gate. No, it's a darn good question. And the reason it's darn good is that we sense at every turn the radical contingency of things around us, which is Thomas Aquinas' starting point for his third argument for God's existence, that the world is, but doesn't have to be. Now, when I say world, I can mean the things right in front of me. I can mean a computer or keyboard. I can mean a microphone. I can mean me. I can mean the totality of existence, because everything in the universe is of that nature. It is, but doesn't have to be. And see, we know that intuitively, and that's what prompts us to ask that question. Well, then, why is there a universe at all? So that's an elaborate way of saying I think it's a real illegitimate move simply to say it's a non-question. It's a very good question.
I found when talking with skeptics, atheists, agnostics, that they take the same approach as Ricky Gervais, which is first to dismiss the question as completely irrelevant. But then if you keep pushing, if you keep trying to emphasize that the question is relevant, then they try to turn it from a why question into a how question. Talk about the differences between asking why does the universe exist and how does the universe exist?
Yeah, well, one way to do it is the why question tends to be more philosophical in nature, and the how more scientific or physics oriented. But see, I maybe just let's draw a line through each of those and just say, how do you explain contingent existence? So use the word how if you want there. How do you explain, what's the sufficient explanation for contingent existence? And see, in a way, you don't have to leap to the universe. Start with any particular thing. Start with my own existence. I would maintain my existence is contingent. What's my proof? Well, I had parents, right? I exist, but I didn't have to exist. I exist because of my parents. More to it, I eat and drink. Right? I exist, but heck, I wouldn't exist in my present form unless I ate and drank. More to it, right now, this very minute, I'm breathing air. So my existence is real. Absolutely, it's real. I exist. But it's at every turn dependent, conditioned, contingent. Contingere in the Latin has a sense of touching with. It just means dependency. See? Okay, so to forget the universe for a second. Just start with me. All right, I exist, but I don't have to exist. Therefore, I was caused, right? And I just delineated a number of these causes. Okay, the mind is restless, and it says, okay, how about those causes? How about my parents? Were they self-explanatory, or were they contingent? I said, well, obviously, they were contingent too. How about the food and the drink that I've been consuming? Is that self-explanatory or contingent? Of course, it's contingent. The food came from various sources. The water came from here and there under all kinds of physical conditions, et cetera, right? How about the air I'm breathing? Is that self-explanatory or no? It's conditioned in a million ways, right? All right, how about those causes? And the mind seizes right away, okay, I could press that process on and on. I could keep searching for the cause. Now, mind you, not of the universe, me. All I'm trying to explain is me right now. How do I exist? I haven't gotten there yet. I've invoked all kinds of causes, but they themselves are conditioned or contingent. If I go on indefinitely, it just goes on and on and on, infinitely, what have I done? I haven't explained a darn thing. I haven't moved really an inch toward explaining my existence. Conclusion, I have to come finally to some reality which is not contingent in its being, which exists in a necessary manner, or to put it in more technical language, whose very essence is to be, right? So I exist, but my essence is not to be. Otherwise, I would be the necessary reality. Rather, my essence is to be human. I exist in a very particular way, under very definite conditions. The reality we've just argued to is a reality whose very nature is to be. This is what I would say intellectually informed Christians call God. Because if you press it just one little step, what do you see? That reality must be the creative ground of all contingent reality. So that's how I would approach it, is maybe I dissolve the why, how thing and just say, okay, give me a sufficient explanation of a contingent state of affairs. And once you start there, you're going to end with God if you're intellectually honest.
Let's see where Stephen Colbert and Ricky Gervais go next in the discussion.
Well, why is it relevant?
Okay, fine. How is there something? Because you think of God as the prime mover. How is there anything
well,
instead of nothing?
I don't. This is a ridiculous
Is there a prime mover?
If
Is there a demiurge that started everything?
Well, outside science and nature, I don't believe so.
Now, how about that response? So Ricky Gervais denies that there's a prime mover behind everything, and he says outside of science and nature, I don't believe so. What do you make of that?
Well, it's just begging the question, isn't it? I mean, because everything I've pointed to so far in my little attempt to explain my own existence have been natural causes, right? From my parents to food and drink to the air that I breathe. Now, keep pressing if you want. Go back in time, go around the rest of nature, go to the earth itself, go to the solar system, go to the wide reaches of the universe. Have I ever come to something whose being is non-contingent? And the answer is no. Nature is nothing but the sum total of contingent things. And so I can multiply that as much as I want, but it's like multiplying a million times zero. What do I get? Zero. No matter how much I multiply, zero. See, I can multiply contingent causes all I want. But when you say nature, and that's all you mean, then you beg the question. You haven't really come to the answer that we're seeking. Say, is nature, in fact, non-contingent? And I think, if you want to press it, the Big Bang Theory, which Ricky Gervais, I think, invokes, doesn't he, at one point, proves the radical contingency of all of nature. Because all of it came from this great singularity and the explosion from the singularity. That means every dimension of finite reality was, in fact, a contingent state of affairs. So it doesn't reach the conclusion that we're looking for, the explanation we're looking for.
Next up, the two men turn to a discussion about the definition of agnosticism or atheism. So let's listen to Ricky Gervais first.
This is the thing, right? So I'm an agnostic atheist, technically. Agnostics means no one knows whether there's a God. So everyone's technically agnostic. We don't know.
That's true.
So
that's true.
An agnostic atheist is someone who doesn't know there's a God or not, as no one does.
So you're not convicted of your atheism?
Well, I
am.
Sure. No, I am, because atheism is only rejecting the claim that there is a God. Atheism isn't a belief system. Mm-hmm. So this is atheism in a nutshell. You say there's a God. I say, can you prove that? You say no. I say, I don't believe you then. Mm-hmm. So you believe in one God, I assume?
In three persons, but go ahead.
Okay, so you believe... Okay.
What do you make of that definition of atheism, Bishop?
Well, in some ways, it's kind of a non-starter. To me, that's sort of a dull side road in the conversation. I went to Karl Rahner, who said that the atheist is always a parasite in a way, because just the very word itself is parasitical upon God. It's like it or not, it's the denial of God. And so the atheist is always under the aegis of God, always sort of fascinated by God. And I think you see that in all the great atheists, from Feuerbach through Christopher Hitchens. They're obsessed with God. And so they're trying to play a game of like, oh, I'm kind of indifferent. It doesn't matter to me. I think it matters enormously to them. And they're even obsessed with the question of God. But, the question, too, of like knowledge and faith and what you're certain of, I don't hold with him that, it's just a matter of, wild, unfounded belief. No, we just rehearsed a famous argument for God's existence that I think is pretty darn convincing. I think you can bring forward, and I speak here as a Catholic, some very intellectually compelling reasons for believing in God. Is every one of them, mathematically, apodictically airtight? Well, no, but we hardly ever get that sort of certitude in any philosophy. I mean, read anyone from Plato to Hegel to Whitehead to Wittgenstein. Do you ever get that kind of airtight apodictic certitude? Very rarely. But that doesn't mean there isn't a rational path or there isn't very real intellectual insight you can come to. And I would say as a Catholic that you can come to that. So I don't think it's simply a matter of just we're swapping, wildly arbitrary belief systems. I think we can offer some pretty compelling arguments.
Well, next up, Ricky Gervais offers what we might consider to be his first argument for atheism. So here it goes.
So you believe in one God, I assume?
In three persons, but go ahead.
Okay, so you believe... Okay. Mm-hmm. So... But there are about 3,000 to choose from that have been, people who believe in...
I've done some reading, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So basically, you believe in... You deny one less God than I do. You don't believe in 2,999 gods, and I don't believe in just one more.
Right.
Now that one got a big reaction from the crowd. What's your reaction, Bishop?
Yeah, I think it's stupid, and it's been rehearsed by, I think it's Dawkins did it and Hitchens, and they've all kind of brought that up. To me, it's sort of a colossally unhelpful observation. I mean, the thing could be spun just as easily in the other direction. Is what do the 3,000 gods represent but this very deep and abiding human sense of the sacred? Now, articulated to varying degrees of exactitude, sure. And, can I say, yeah, I think that understanding of God is deeply inadequate in various religious traditions. I don't hold, for example, to polytheism. I don't hold to all kinds of views. But I see behind all of those philosophies and theologies a very deep intuition in regard to God. That, in fact, the 3,000 gods to me proves that the consensus of the nations, the consensus gentium, is that God exists. Now, articulated in different ways and to varying degrees of exactitude, but that doesn't lead me to say there's no God, almost on the contrary. It's like saying a whole variety of political positions means that there's no validity to politics whatsoever. No, there's all kinds of views, relatively adequate, relatively inadequate, many that I would reject. But what they all show is a deep passion for justice and for political order. In a similar way, all of the religions show that the religious instinct is very deep and corresponds to something eminently real. Now, go back to Vatican II if you want, that we don't simply reject all other religions too cool. What we say is they represent elements of truth. There are lights and insights in all the religious traditions. So it's not true to say that simply out of court, I dismiss all the other gods. No, I would appreciate a lot of truth in those religious points of view. But they're trying to get to sort of bully us into a indifferentism about religion. No, I in a way believe in all those gods too. I believe in the impulse and instinct behind those beliefs.
It strikes me that this one less God objection is really an attempt to make atheism sound less radical. They're trying to get you to say, well, we're basically the same. We have this one minor difference.
Yeah, there's one minor difference. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And so all these kind of psychological moves that the new atheists make that avoid the argument. Because I don't know, Brand, you do a lot of dialogue with atheists too, and there's something about the classical arguments that's really compelling, I think. And so they sense that. And you listen to like a William Lane Craig or someone that really lays them out with a lucidity and a clarity. They get right away, oh, I'm in trouble. So I better change the subject. I better psychologize this. I better run around the argument. And I find that from Bertrand Russell to Ricky Gervais is a favorite strategy.
Well, next up, the discussion turns to a very interesting question, whether the act of gratitude points to God. So in this part of the conversation, Colbert sort of goes on the offensive. So let's listen in.
Do you ever have a feeling of great gratitude for existence?
Of course.
Do you ever have?
I know. The chances are billions to one that I am on this planet as me and never will be again.
And I know I can't convince you that there is a God, nor do I really want to convince you there's a God. But no. I can only explain my experience, which is that I have a strong desire to direct that gratitude toward something or someone.
Of course.
And that thing is God.
We're mortal. We want to make sense of nature and science, and it's too unfathomable that everything in the universe was once crunched into something smaller than an atom.
But you don't know that.
Well,
you're just believing Stephen Hawking, and that's a matter of faith in his abilities.
Yes.
You don't know it yourself. You're accepting that because someone told you.
Yeah. Well. But science is constantly proved all the time. You see.
Let's stop there. Let's focus first on that gratitude question. Talk about how gratitude can be a signpost toward God.
It's a good argument. I thought Colbert began well in that segment and ended not so well. I thought the beginning was good, and it's reminded me very much of Dorothy Day's famous comment when she was basically an agnostic, but she was kind of getting intrigued by religion, and she had a child. And what she said was, I felt a gratitude that was so profound and so powerful, I knew it wouldn't correspond to anything in this world. That is a really powerful thing, and to dismiss that as mere emotionalism would be a huge mistake. See, think about gratitude for a second. It's an interesting phenomenon. I'm not grateful to the earth right now because it's holding me down, right? I kind of recognize that as a natural necessity, that there's gravity. Or if the wind, blew something down the street that I like that. I wouldn't thank the wind. I'd say that's just a natural necessity. But I'll thank you for doing something that let's say you offer me something or you do me a favor, because I realize, no, that didn't have to be. See, that is, but it didn't have to be. It was the result of someone's free choice, Here's the instinct, I think, behind Dorothy Day, behind Stephen Colbert. The instinct is that we realize that the whole universe is like that. It is, but it doesn't have to be. That it's wrong to think of the universe as simply dumb necessity. No, in fact, we realize how contingent it is. It is, but it doesn't have to be. And therefore, the proper instinct, which corresponds to a metaphysical truth, is thank you, is gratitude. And so, as Colbert put it, I think quite correctly, you want to direct that gratitude towards someone. And that's not a trivial, mere kind of emotional. There's a lot of metaphysical depth to that argument if you start unpacking it. Now, Ricky Gervais, as the atheists usually do, is they run around that. So he acknowledges, he does feel that kind of gratitude. But then he just puts it in terms of how unlikely it was that I would come here from the Big Bang and so on. But it's getting at something deeper than that. The world is, in all its beauty and so on, is but doesn't have to be. In those situations, my instinct correctly is to say, thank you. See? Is the whole universe more like you're doing me a favor than it is like the earth holding me down right now through gravity? You know what I'm saying? And it's more like the first one.
Another person this calls to mind is one of the 6 pivotal players you featured in your series. I think you even make this point in the episode on him, G.K. Chesterton, who famously observed that life was a great gift, and if it was a gift, then there needs to be some giver to thank for it.
No, quite right. And see, that's putting in somewhat more poetic language, the language of contingency. It's given, and of course, a lot of the philosophers, as you know, Brandon, play with that, especially the Germans, because the expression in German for there is es gibt. It gives. And of course, the Germans, naturally, who have a speculative frame of mind, love to play with that. And then read someone like Jean-Luc Marion, influenced very much by the Germans there, love that. Es gibt, it gives. Yeah, what gives? What's the S that gibt? That we realize being is dumbly there. It's there in the form of a gift. It is, but doesn't have to be. And so in the presence of a gift, the proper response is gratitude.
Let's wrap up the interview here. We'll look at one final segment between Stephen Colbert and Ricky Gervais. In this segment, Gervais brings up an argument for atheism that, frankly, I haven't heard. It's kind of a new one for me. So let's listen to it, and then we'll see what you think.
If we take something like any fiction, any holy book, and any other fiction, and destroyed it, okay, in 1,000 years' time, that wouldn't come back just as it was. Whereas if we took every science book, right, and every fact, and destroyed them all, in 1,000 years, they'd all be back, because all the same tests would be the same result.
That's good. That's really good.
We'll stop there. And notice at the end, Stephen Colbert says, that's good. That's really good. And for the rest of their little exchange, doesn't really push back on it. So what do you make of that? Or were you as impressed as Colbert?
No, not much. I don't know what he sees as particularly good about that. I mean, to me, it's a banality. If you destroyed all the works of Shakespeare, would they come back? Well, of course not. They wouldn't come back as such. You destroyed the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Would it come back? Well, of course not. Those are aesthetic realities. They come from the poetic imagination and from the creativity of very particular individuals. Would the science books come back in the same way? Yeah, they're more likely to because of the nature of science. But it's a scientism that I've complained about forever that would reduce everything to the scientific way of knowing. What? That great works of art or fiction or religious texts wouldn't come back the same way. So what? I mean, we would say that God speaks through these great texts, not as though God like dictating them, but that God's Spirit blows inspirare, right? It blows through these great texts. To me, it's a banality what he's observing there, and I don't know what it's even supposed to prove that these are just inventions, and I mean. Again, I'm not even sure what it's supposed to prove. It's true, but it's a banality, it seems to me.
It struck me, too, that, he says if we took a work of fiction, we destroyed it, 1,000 years, it wouldn't come back, yet science is different. Therefore,
what?
Blank. And I don't know how he would fill in the blank. But it also struck me, too, that, if say every person on the planet was killed except for one or two, and then the whole human race had to be recreated in hundreds of years, you might ask the question, would basic religious instincts and ideas, basic moral sentiments completely be unrecognizable, or would they reemerge similar to how they would today? I think that's an interesting question.
Yes. No, that's good, Brandon. Say more about that, because I think that's the flip side of it, which is absolutely right. Like Lewis's Tao, right? He recognizes this fundamental form that can be discerned in many of the great philosophies and religions of the world, and it represents this consensus and intuition regarding fundamental, I'd call them metaphysical and moral truths, right? And so that's very good. That's the flip side of it, that, yeah, they would come back. Now, not in exactly the same expression, but yeah, those would come back as long as human nature remains what it is, and as long as the world and its fundamental structures remains what it is, yeah, those would indeed come back. So, yeah, that's good. That's the flip side of this question.
Well, it's time now for one of our questions from our listeners. We love hearing from you guys. Thank you to all of you who have submitted questions. A lot of them keep pouring in. Pretty soon here, we're going to do another Q&A episode where we'll take a lot of questions at once. But today we're just going to take one question, and it comes from Anderson, who lives in Mississippi, and asks a very relevant question to what we've been discussing here. So here's Anderson's question.
Hi, Bishop Barron. This is Anderson Smith from New Albany, Mississippi. I was wondering what you thought about the idea that atheism is the natural default position and that the burden of proof for the existence of God lies solely in theism. Thank you very much. Bye.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that question. It comes up a lot. In one way, I don't really care. In one way, who cares? Who has the burden of proof? Let's just look at the argument. So I think it's almost like getting stuck at a preliminary stage of a legal argument. Fine. For sake of our argument, I'll say you're the default position or I'm the default position. Finally, who cares, right? Let's just get to the argument. However, having said that, I do think it's more reasonable to say that religious belief is the default position. And my argument is what I mentioned before, the consensus gentium argument. There is a overwhelming consensus of the human race. If we do Chesterton's Democracy of the Dead here and listen to human beings across all of time, there's an overwhelming consensus that God exists. It's only in very recent times, really, and I date it to people like Feuerbach in the early 19th century, that there have been a even relatively significant number of people who claim that there is no God. That's a very rare position, actually, in the history of the human race. Therefore, I think just on the basis of numbers, the consensus gentium, I think we're the default position. I think you got to make the case against religion. But again, I'm not going to get caught up in the preliminaries of that too much. I'd say let's look at the argument and forget about who's in the default position. You know what I mean? But I do think it's more reasonable to say that atheism is the peculiar position that needs to be argued for.
Well, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Word on Fire Show. If you go to wordonfireshow.com and then click on this episode, you can watch the entire Stephen Colbert, Ricky Gervais exchange. You'll also find extra links to different videos and articles and resources that'll help you go deeper onto this topic. Well, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire Show.